Resident Evil Revelations always stuck with me for one reason. You're out in the middle of the ocean on this ship, and everything else just feels so far away. You look out a window and there's nothing but water. There's no sense of the outside world. It's just you and this big empty ship. It's slower and quieter, and it feels more contained than a lot of Resident Evils around that time.
There's blood coming from the ducts.
But it never feels small. A lot of people still look back on it as one of the stronger horror entries in the series. But what was Resident Evil Revelations? By the time Revelations came out, the series had already been heading in a really clear direction for a while. These big encounters, louder moments, more enemies filling the screen at the same time. Combat was becoming the main focus point in the games, and that shaped how everything else felt. That direction made sense. Resident Evil 4 had changed the series in a huge way, and that influence carried through the rest of the decade. The combat felt good, the movement felt confident, the games were built around momentum. Always pushing you forward, always keeping you active. The scale and spectacle became a big part of how you experienced Resident Evil at that time. Revelations lands right in the middle of all that. And what stands out is how calm it feels by comparison. The game slows itself down. It focuses on quieter moments and these smaller decisions. You can tell that it understands where the series had been going, and it chooses to work within a lighter, more controlled space. A lot of that comes from where Revelations started. Being built for a handheld, the 3DS, it shaped how the game was designed. Everything feels focused. Smaller environments, fewer enemies at once, the pacing slows way down. Every encounter feels deliberate, like it was placed there for a reason. The game stays grounded in that space it gives you.
Great. It's a trap!
That sense of limitation ends up driving the experience. Revelations holds you in place. It encourages you to move carefully and take your time. You're paying attention to the hallways, rooms, and what might be waiting around the corner. Like the older Resident Evils, the tension comes from awareness and patience rather than constant movement. If you look at it that way, Revelations feels intentional. It comes across as a reminder, a smaller entry that explores what Resident Evil feels like when you focus on containment, mood, and pressure instead of scale. The Queen Zenobia is the heart of Resident Evil Revelations. Everything the game wants you to feel comes back to this ship. The story moves and jumps around a lot. There's different characters, different moments. Even with that structure though, the Queen Zenobia stays the central focus. You keep returning to it, seeing it at different points in time and from different perspectives. Over time, it becomes the place the experience settles into. Once you're on board, the game commits to that space. You're moving through a single structure with a clear sense of shape and limits. The layout keeps your attention close. Even when the story jumps around, the ship stays consistent. The Queen Zenobia feels like a place that exists on its own terms. As you move through it, you start to remember how it fits together. Paths connect, areas loop back. Spaces you pass through early take on more meaning later when you return to them. That familiarity builds naturally as you spend time inside it. That repetition matters. You start to feel oriented. You know where you are and where you're going. Moving through the ship becomes more deliberate, and that awareness stays with you. The design keeps movement careful. Sightlines stay short. You're often dealing with what's right in front of you. Sounds play a big role too, making you pay attention to what's happening nearby. The space asks you to slow down and stay present and just listen. The ocean surrounding the ship adds to that feeling also. The Queen Zenobia sits alone out in the water, separated from everything else. Even when you're deep inside it, the isolation is always there in the background. The ship feels self-contained.
Disguised as cruise ships.
Satellites had destroyed Terra Grigia.
Are right above us. They can't just ignore the ultimatum and obliterate the ship.
A lot of the mood comes from what the Queen Zenobia was meant to be. It started as a luxury liner, built to feel refined and comfortable. That intention is still visible in how spaces are laid out, even after everything has gone wrong. Over time, those spaces have broken down. Damage has set in, infection has spread. The signs of decay are part of the environment now. The ship carries that weight with it, and it never really lets go of it. Throughout the game, the Queen Zenobia stays present. Even when the focus shifts, the ship continues to shape how everything feels. Its structure influences how encounters play out and how much room you have to work with. That confinement is where the tension comes from. The movement feels measured, your positioning matters, you're always aware of the space you're in and how it affects your choices. As you spend more time moving through the different episodes, the Queen Zenobia starts to feel familiar in a deeper way. You recognize rooms, you remember earlier moments that happened in the same space. That growing familiarity adds weight every time you return. By centering the experience around one main location, Revelations lets the setting carry the horror. The Queen Zenobia becomes the source of the mood, the pressure, and the pacing. The fear lives in the space itself and the feeling of being held inside it. One of the first things you feel in this game is how much attention it asks you to give your resources. The ammo is there, you're not constantly empty, but at the same time, you're never swimming in it. Every reload stays in the back of your mind. You're always aware of how much you have and how quickly it can disappear. That awareness shapes how combat feels, because the fights are something you have to pause on and think about. You think about whether an enemy is worth the bullets. You think about where you're standing and how long the fight might last. Every encounter carries a small decision with it. Finding ammo reinforces that. Ammo is setting out in the open, but it's not nearly as much as Resident Evil 5 or 4. You're checking rooms, you're opening drawers, you're scanning environments. Supplies reward attention and patience more than speed. Because of that, combat never turns into noise. You're not dumping rounds just to clear space. Every shot feels like a decision. Every magazine feels like something you planned around, not something you burned through. That balance is what makes the survival aspect work. You're supported enough to keep moving forward, and you're cautious enough to stay engaged. The game keeps you thinking about what you have before it ever puts pressure on you.
Just keep coming. We'll have to get through them.
The Genesis scanner ends up becoming part of how you move through this game. At a basic level, it's a tool that you use to search the environment. You scan rooms to find ammo, health items, and these hidden pickups that aren't immediately visible. Some of these are practical supplies, but others are collectibles, like the handprints scattered throughout the game. Scanning also applies to enemies. When you scan them, you earn points, and those points build towards a reward. Once you've hit that threshold, the game grants you a healing item. And over time, that turns scanning into another layer of survival. You're encouraged to slow down during encounters and take advantage of the system instead of relying on what's in your inventory. The moment the scanner comes out, your pace changes. You slow down and start paying attention to the space you're standing in. Rooms become places to search rather than spaces to pass through. You start searching and scanning each room instead of just running through them. The walls, corners, surfaces, they all start to matter more the longer you spend scanning them. That habit settles in pretty quickly. You scan when you enter a room, you scan after encounters, you scan when things feel calm. It becomes part of the rhythm of play without needing any prompting. Moving and scanning start to feel connected. There's a vulnerability tied to that also. When you're scanning, your focus stays on the environment. Your attention narrows, you're standing still longer. Watching the scanner sweep instead of watching the space around you. That exposure creates a kind of tension in its own. As you keep playing, scanning starts to feel like preparation more so than an extra feature. It's how you make sure you're stocked, it's how you recover health, it's how you catch things you would miss by moving too quickly. Supplies found through scanning feel earned because they come from patience and awareness. The Genesis scanner becomes part of the game's language. It teaches you to slow down, to look carefully, and to stay present inside of every space you enter. Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far, thank you for hanging out with me for a little bit. I really do appreciate you. If you're enjoying the video and you haven't yet, consider subbing. We are getting super close to 10,000 subs, which is still just crazy to me. But dropping a like goes a long way also. And I always love reading the comments, so let me know if you ever played Revelations and what your memories are with it. If you haven't played it, I'd love to know what this video makes you think about it. and if you'd ever consider playing it. And also, if you're on mobile, there's the hype button. It's on the video for the first 7 days of its life. If you press it, it gives the video hype points, which essentially tells the algorithm, hey, this video is good, show it to more people. It's a way that you can directly help grow the video and the channel. But that's enough of all that. Let's get back into Revelations and finish talking about how the moment-to-moment gameplay feels.
Incredible.
Weapon upgrades in Revelations feels very hands-on. There isn't a shop that you keep returning to or a in-between level menu. You find upgrade kits out in the world as you explore. When you hit an item box, you decide how to use them. You can add parts, remove them, and move them between weapons depending on what you're carrying. That setup makes upgrades feel flexible. You're not locking into one path early on, you're adjusting as you go. If you want more ammo in a weapon you're leaning on, you can do that. If you want to push damage or change how something handles, you can make that call in the moment. Those choices stay practical. You're thinking about what you actually need right now, how often you're reloading, how long fights tend to last, how comfortable a weapon feels in your hands. The system lets you tune things based on how you want them to shoot and feel. Since ammo always matters, upgrades feel tied to planning. Increasing capacity changes how long you can stay in a fight. Boosting damage changes how quickly encounters resolve. Small adjustments can have a real impact on how confident you feel moving forward. Over time, managing upgrades becomes parts of your routine. You check your loadout, you swap parts around, you prepare before heading back out. It feels like maintenance rather than progression, like making sure your gear is ready for what's ahead. The upgrade system supports the same mindset the rest of the game builds. You're thinking ahead, you're making deliberate choices, you're shaping how combat plays out based on preparation and attention.
Really sick of seeing your face.
One of the most interesting things about Resident Evil Revelations to me is the way it's structured. Not the story itself, but the way the game chooses to tell it. The whole experience is broken up into episodes. Each chapter feels like its own segment, with a clear beginning and a clear end, and a sense that you're stepping into a specific moment rather than a continuous stretch.
Opposing the city's development, launched a bioterrorist attack. They not only released a virus, but also several creatures, known as bioorganic weapons, further complicating the situation.
From the start, the game presents itself like a series. You load in, you get a recap, and then you move into the next piece of the story. That previously on Resident Evil Revelations framing shows up a lot. It's repeated often. Sometimes it even shows up when you don't really feel like you need it. But at the same time, it sets a rhythm. Every time a new episode begins, the game takes a moment to remind you where you left off. It recenters the story before pushing forward again. That structure really changes how the game feels to play, because you're watching moments unfold in pieces. Each episode focuses on a specific situation, a specific character, or a specific part of a larger story. You get information, you sit with it for a bit, and then the game cuts away. Perspective shifts are a big part of that. The game moves between different characters and locations, often leaving one thread hanging while it follows another. You don't always get answers right away, just like a TV show. You carry questions with you from episode to episode. You remember something you saw earlier and wait to see how it connects later. That delayed structure really builds anticipation. You're rarely given everything all at once. Instead, you're handed pieces over time. An episode might end on a reveal, a threat, or a moment of uncertainty, and then the game shifts focus. You're left holding that moment in your head while something else plays out. It really does feel like watching a TV series. You sit through an episode, you absorb what happened, you think about where things might go next, then you move on to the next one, carrying that context with you. A lot of this pacing comes from the game's handheld roots. Revelations was built for shorter play sessions. Episodes are designed to be completed in relatively brief stretches. You can pick up the game, play through a chapter, and put it down without feeling like you're cutting something off halfway through. That design choice shapes the flow. Each episode feels self-contained enough to stand on its own, while still feeding into a larger arc. The structure respects the idea that the player might step away and come back later, and then the recaps help re-anchor you when you do return. Even when played on console, that structure still holds up. You feel the episode breaks, you feel the transitions, the pacing stays deliberate, with pauses built into the experience. The game gives you space to process what just happened before moving forward. The pacing works really well for tension. Horror benefits from anticipation. The episodic format creates natural pauses where ideas can linger. Since you're not rushing from one moment to the next, you're given time to think about what you've seen and what might be coming. And the way information is withheld plays into that. Revelations often delays explanations. You see consequences before causes. You witness events without full context. Answers arrive gradually as the episode stacks on top of each other. That slow release keeps the story present in your mind even when you're not actively playing.
refer to the incident as the Terra Grigia Panic. Following the incident, the FBC announced it has successfully disbanded the terrorist group called Veltro.
At the same time, though, this structure doesn't work for everyone in every situation. The episode breaks are noticeable. The recaps can feel repetitive when you're playing for long stretches. Flow can feel segmented when you want to stay immersed without interruption. Those pauses pull you out of the moment sometimes. You're reminded that you're moving between chapters. The game stops to reset the stage before continuing. For some people, that breaks immersion a lot more than just supporting it. For me, though, that segmentation is part of the identity. It reinforces the idea that Revelations isn't trying to feel like one long continuous run. It's comfortable being broken up. It leans into that serialized rhythm and commits to it fully. Each episode has its own pacing. Some focus on exploration, some lean heavier on tension. Others push story forward. The game varies what it delivers in each chapter, which helps keep the overall experience from really blending together. By the time you reach the later episodes, that rhythm is familiar. You know when the game stops and starts, you know when to expect a pause. You understand that answers come over time and not all at once.
Norman, stop! Morgan isn't here!
That's why the structure really stuck with me, because Revelations schedules its story, it parcels it out. It trusts the player to remember and to anticipate and to stay engaged across gaps. The game unfolds the way a TV series does, and I thought that was just super interesting for this.
We can finally reveal what happened at Terra Grigia.
Yeah, but the cost was high.
The BSAA will have to be overhauled.
The storm is gone now. But how long will it last?
For the story itself, the game is set in 2005. It lands right between RE4 and RE5. Umbrella is already gone at this point, and the world is dealing with what bioterrorism looks like now that it's out in the open. Outbreaks aren't isolated anymore. There's something governments and organizations are actively trying to respond to on a global level. That's where the BSAA comes in, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. They exist to track down and contain biological threats wherever they appear. At this point in the timeline, though, they're still a fairly new organization. It's operating, but it's still finding its footing and figuring out how far its reach actually goes. Before the BSAA, there was the FBC, the Federal Bioterrorism Commission. They handled these situations from a government angle, and a lot of what happens in Revelations traces back to decisions made under their watch. Their involvement sits quietly in the background at first, then slowly becomes more important as the story fills in the gaps. The story itself starts with a disappearance, Chris Redfield and Jessica Stewart. They vanished during a mission, and their last known location points to the Mediterranean Sea, while Jill and Parker Luciani are sent in to figure out what happened. That search leads them to the Queen Zenobia. From the outside, it looks like an abandoned cruise ship, but once Jill steps onto it, it becomes obvious that something's wrong, as always. The ship is filled with bioorganic threats, and whatever happened there wasn't an accident.
I got something. I think it's a gun.
Now what?
Give me a sec.
So, it's not Chris.
As the episodes continue, the situation starts to widen. What begins as a missing persons case starts connecting to earlier incidents and buried operations. Pieces of information surface that never made it into the public records. The episodic format lets the game jump between what's happening on the Queen Zenobia and events from the past that explain how things reached this point. One of those events is the destruction of Terra Grigia. It's a floating city that was wiped out during a bioterror attack. That incident was blamed on a group known as Veltro. At the time, they were believed to be responsible for the outbreak, and the FBC ordered the city's destruction to contain it.
The FBC announced it has successfully disbanded the terrorist group called Veltro.
As more information comes out, Veltro's role starts to look different. Their name keeps coming up across the story, tied to messages, symbols, and recorded broadcasts. The truth behind their actions unfolds slowly as different episodes add context.
The Queen Dido is already deep below the sea. There's no escape, no chance of survival.
The virus behind all this is known as T-Abyss. It's tied closely to aquatic environments, which fits naturally with the setting of the Queen Zenobia and the surrounding sea. The creatures it creates reflect that connection, giving the outbreak its own identity within the series.
He's turning guppies into jaws! Shh, quiet.
The threat connected to T-Abyss reaches far beyond the ship itself, though. Broadcasts reveal plans involving the spread of the virus into the world's oceans. At that point, the situation stops being about a single location and becomes something a lot bigger. Stopping the virus means preventing damage on a global scale.
What have they created?
We can do this, Chris.
As the story moves forward, attention shifts between Jill's investigation of the Queen Zenobia and Chris's parallel mission, and what's happening inside the BSAA and the remnants of the FBC. Clive R. O'Brien, who leads the BSAA, plays a central role in steering the investigation and bringing hidden decisions into the open.
FBC, everybody freeze! Your heads in the air!
Over time, corruption within the FBC comes into focus. Choices by its leadership directly feed into the chain of events surrounding Terra Grigia, Veltro, and the Queen Zenobia. The organization's attempts to control bioterror threats left lasting consequences that ripple through the present-day story. By the end, all those threads come together. The plan to spread T-Abyss is stopped. The Queen Zenobia is prevented from becoming the source of a much larger disaster. The truth behind the FBC's actions is exposed. Those events have real consequences. The FBC is dissolved. Responsibility for handling bioterror threats consolidates into the BSAA. The game shows a world that's moved into a new phase, where biological weapons are a recognized global danger and response organizations carry serious weight. Throughout all this, the story stays focused on function. Relationships exist, but they don't take over the narrative. The emphasis stays on investigation, cause and effect, and how systems respond when things go wrong. The plot is there to support the tension built by the game. Information arrives over time, stakes grow as understanding deepens. By the time everything lines up, it feels complete because every piece has already been placed along the way.
Done. Everything finished. Finally, I can die. I can die.
When you step back and look at Resident Evil Revelations as a whole, it's hard not to come back to where it started. The game first released on the 3DS in 2012, and that shaped how a lot of people thought about it right away. A Resident Evil game on a handheld came with certain expectations. People assumed it would be smaller in scope, something designed to sit off to the side of the main series. But once you actually spent some time with it, that idea doesn't really hold up. For the hardware it launched on, Revelations is dense. The environments carry a lot of detail. The lighting does a ton of work. The Queen Zenobia feels like a real place you're moving through rather than a collection of isolated areas. Even on a handheld screen, the game carries weight and atmosphere. That density shows up everywhere. The game feels focused. The pacing is deliberate. The mechanics support each other. Everything feels like it was placed with intention, and that comes through pretty quickly once you settle into it. When Revelations later came to consoles and PC, that design carried over pretty cleanly. Higher resolution and smoother performance made the details easier to see, but the experience itself stayed the same. The pacing still works, the tension still holds, and the structure still makes sense. For people who missed it on 3DS, those later releases changed how the game was perceived. It started getting talked about less as a handheld release and more of a full entry that simply arrived on a different platform first. What really stands out is how well the design holds up over time. The focus on restraint, exploration, and tension doesn't depend on spectacle. It depends on systems, structures, and pacing. Those things age well. As the series continued, more people came back to Revelations and started appreciating what it was doing. The slower movement, the smaller spaces, the attention to the mood. The way the game asked you to stay present instead of constantly pushing forward. Within the larger Resident Evil timeline, Revelations sits in a very specific spot. It comes after the series had leaned hard into action, and it exists during a period where things were still finding balance. What Revelations shows is that this kind of experience still had a place. Careful movement, resource management, tension built through awareness, those ideas still resonated with people. For a lot of fans, Revelations feels reassuring. because it never tried to redefine the series. It doesn't chase scale, it settles into its own rhythm and trusts that approach. You can see that in how people talk about it now. The atmosphere gets mentioned, the pacing, the Queen Zenobia as a setting. It's a game people return to rather than just something they passed through once. That shift in how it's viewed really matters. Revelations was always built as a complete experience. The platform it launched on shaped perception more than the design itself ever did. Looking back, it feels like a bridge. It connects the action-heavy stretch of the series with a renewed appreciation for restraint and mood. It reminds everyone what Resident Evil can feel like when it slows down. I really think this is one of the strongest entries in the whole franchise. If you made it to the end, thank you for hanging out with me for a bit. I really appreciate you spending the time with me. If you enjoyed the video, consider subbing. I have a ton of Resident Evil content on the channel now, and we're working through the whole series. Also consider leaving a like and a comment. Let me know what you thought of Resident Evil Revelations, if you ever played it, if you'd like to play it, if this is your first time seeing anything on it. I'd love to hear it. But thank you again for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you all. As always, I'll see y'all later.